My daughter said it first. That is the part nobody expects when I tell this story, and it is the part that matters most. Everything that happened in the will reading, the binder, the trust administrator, the $418,000, all of it, none of it would have been in motion if my daughter Maya had not said something at a Sunday dinner 14 months before the reading, in the specific, uncalculating way that children say things that adults have been carefully not saying. She was 9 years old. She said it without malice, without strategy, without any awareness that she was doing anything other than asking an honest question. She said it because she had been listening to the adults around her all her life, and she had noticed a thing that none of the adults had said out loud, and 9-year-olds have not yet learned that noticing a thing and saying a thing are supposed to be different steps with a calculation between them. She said, "Mom, why does Uncle Derek always call them his properties when they're Grandma Nora's?" The table went quiet. My grandmother, Nora May Sinclair, who was sitting across from Maya with a glass of sweet tea and the expression she had worn her whole life when something had been said correctly, looked at my daughter and then looked at me. She did not say anything, but something passed between us, between her and me, in that look that I understood and that I think I had been waiting to understand for years. That was the beginning. If you've ever had a child say what the adults in the room had been carefully not saying, stay with me. Because what Maya said at that Sunday dinner set in motion 14 months of trust documents and forensic accounting and a will reading in Atlanta, where the truth arrived the way my grandmother always said the truth arrived, exactly when it was needed and not a moment before. I need to tell you about Nora Sinclair, and I need to tell you about what it meant to be her granddaughter rather than her grandson. Nora was born in 1941 in Savannah, Georgia, the youngest daughter of a man who worked the docks and a woman who took in laundry and who had, between the two of them, a combined understanding of what it meant to work hard for something and watch it taken from you by circumstances outside your control. Nora had grown up watching this and had made, at some age she described to me once as old enough to be angry about it, the decision that her own life would have documentation, that nothing she built would be ambiguous, that she would be precise about what was hers and what she intended to happen to it. She had married Raymond Sinclair in 1962. Raymond had worked in logistics and had been, by her description, a steady and uncomplicated man who loved her and died in 1998 of a heart attack that she said came with no warning, which is how Raymond did most things. She had spent the 25 years after his death alone, which is the wrong word. She had spent them building. Buying the first rental property in East Atlanta in 2001, then another indicator in 2003. Gradually, over 15 years, accumulating 6 single-family rental houses across the Atlanta metro that she managed with the attention she brought to everything, which was total. By the time my brother Derek and I were adults and Nora was in her 70s, the 6 properties had a combined value of approximately $2.8 million and were generating roughly $12,400 per month in gross rental income. This was not a small achievement. It was the product of 30-plus years of deliberate work by a woman who had grown up watching work disappear without a trace and had decided hers would not. My brother Derek is 4 years older than me. He is tall and confident and has a quality I have spent my life trying to name accurately because the name matters. The name is. He moves through the world as though his presence in a room is a favor he is extending to it. He is not a cruel person. I want to be precise about this, the way I try to be precise about most things. He is a person who has received so much confirmation throughout his life that the world is arranged for his benefit that he has stopped questioning whether the arrangement is real. He was my grandmother's primary male grandchild. He had stayed in Georgia. He had started a commercial cleaning company that was genuinely successful and that he had built through genuine work. He was, in my family's eyes, the capable one. I had moved to Atlanta from Macon in 2008, which was close enough to still be present but far enough to be clearly distinct from the family's gravitational center in Savannah. I worked in social work administration. I was the financial operations director for a nonprofit called Atlanta Family Services, overseeing the organization's budget, grants, and financial compliance. It was careful, specific, unglamorous work that my family described to people as "she works with families" in the tone of a sentence that has been shortened to exclude the part that would require explanation. My grandmother was the exception. She asked me, every time I visited, about the specific work, the grant structures, the compliance requirements, the audit cycles, with the interest of a woman who recognized financial precision when she encountered it. Derek had offered to help Nora with the properties in 2017. She was 76, her knees were difficult, and the physical work of property management was getting harder. He said he would handle the tenant communications, the maintenance coordination, the rent collection. He said it with the ease of a man offering something that was already implicitly his to offer. Nora said yes. What happened over the next 5 years was what happens when a person with Derek's assumption about the world's arrangement is given access to something that isn't yet documented as belonging to someone else. I'll get to that. The Sunday dinner where Maya asked her question was in October 2022. We were at Nora's house in Savannah, the house she'd lived in for 50 years, with the kitchen that smelled like everything a kitchen should smell like and the back porch where the conversation always eventually migrated. My parents were there. Derek was there with his wife and their teenage son. My daughter Maya was there, sitting next to Nora, which she always chose to do because the two of them had a relationship I can only describe as the relationship between two people who recognize each other's quality of attention. Derek had been talking about the properties. He had a habit of bringing them up, not directly claiming them. Nothing that could be called a declaration, but positioning them. He said, when I expand the Decatur unit, rather than when we expand, or when the Decatur unit is expanded. He said, my tenant in the East Atlanta property, meaning Nora's tenant. He said, my management approach, as if the management were the ownership. Nobody corrected him. Not my parents. Not my uncle. Not me, though I had been noticing the construction for months. Maya said, Mom, why does Uncle Derek always call them his properties when they're Grandma Nora's? The table held that for a long moment. Derek said, carefully, with the practiced smoothness of a man who had deflected inconvenient observations before, it's just a way of talking, Maya Bug. I help manage them. Nora looked at Maya, then at me. The look lasted about 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, I understood something that I had been circling for months without landing on. After dinner, when Derek and his family had gone and my parents had moved to the porch, and it was just Nora and me washing up in the kitchen, she said, without looking up from the sink, you noticed. I said, yes. She said, how long? I said, about a year. She said, same. She handed me a dish. I dried it. She said, I need to talk to you about some things. Not tonight. Next time you come. Just you. I said, okay. She said, bring your professional brain. Not your granddaughter brain. The professional one. I drove back to Atlanta that night thinking about what she meant by the professional brain, and by the time I crossed back into Fulton County I understood. I went back to Savannah 3 weeks later, on a Saturday, without telling anyone else I was going. I sat at Nora's kitchen table, and she put 2 folders in front of me and said, tell me what you see. The first folder contained the rent payment records from the 6 properties, what the tenants were paying, what was being deposited into the estate account, what the maintenance invoices showed. The second folder contained bank statements for a secondary account Nora had noticed on a statement that had come addressed to the house. She had opened it because her name was on it as secondary holder. She had not opened a secondary account. Someone had added her as secondary without her knowledge, and the account had been receiving transfers that matched, in timing but not in amount, the rental income records. I looked at the first folder carefully. I looked at the second folder. I took out my phone and made a table in my notes application, matching the rental income dates to the transfer dates. I said, Nora, how long has this been going on? She said, I've been watching it for 2 years. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I thought I might be wrong. I said, you're not wrong. She said, I know. I needed you to confirm it. I spent 3 hours at that kitchen table. By the time I left, I had a picture that was incomplete but directionally clear. Rental income was coming in, a portion was being redirected before it hit the main estate account, and the redirection was going to an account Nora had not authorized. The specific amounts, the timeline, and the legal structure would take a professional to build properly. But the shape of it was clear. I called Nora's attorney, a woman named Beverly Okafor in Savannah, who had been handling Nora's estate planning since 2014, from my car before I left Nora's neighborhood. Beverly was not surprised. She had been waiting, she said, for someone to look at the records carefully. She had flagged a concern to Nora in 2021 about the secondary account and had been told by Nora that she was handling it. She had not pushed. She said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "I need to know about the trust." Beverly said, "What trust?" I said, "Nora has a trust. She set one up. I need to understand the structure before we go any further." Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How did you know about the trust?" I said, "She told me, tonight. Just the fact of it. She said she'd set one up in 2019 and that Beverly had the documents." Beverly said, "She told you?" I said, "Yes." Beverly said, "She's been waiting for the right person to ask. I need to tell you about the trust because the trust is the whole structure underneath this story." Nora had established the Sinclair Family Trust in March 2019. Beverly Okafor had drafted it. The trust held all 6 rental properties. The named beneficiary, upon Nora's death, was me, Rosalie Denise Sinclair Porter, her granddaughter. She had not told anyone. Not my parents. Not Derek. Not me, until the October 2022 Sunday dinner, when Maya's question created the moment she had been waiting for. I drove back to Beverly's office the following week and sat across from her with the trust documents open on the table, and I read them carefully, the way Nora had told me to read everything, with a professional brain engaged, not the granddaughter brain. The trust was clean, well-constructed. Beverly had done careful work. The 6 properties were held in trust, with Nora as trustee during her lifetime and me as successor trustee upon her death. The trust also contained, in a section Beverly flagged specifically, a provision for an independent financial audit of any management activity conducted on trust assets during the trustee's lifetime. That provision was the one Nora had insisted on. Beverly said she had pushed back on it as unnecessary at the time. Nora had said it was necessary. Nora had said, "I know my family. I want the audit provision." Beverly had put it in. The provision meant that when Nora died, the first act of the trust administration would be an independent audit of all management activity on the 6 properties going back to the establishment of the trust, going back, that is, to 2019, covering the entire period of Derek's management. Before I tell you what that audit found, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I want to know who's out there. There was a period of about 8 months, from my first full understanding of the trust structure to Nora's death, that I need to tell you about because it contains the most difficult truth in this story. I knew, and Nora was still alive, and Derek was still managing the properties as if they were his. And every family gathering during those 8 months, Christmas 2022, Easter 2023, the family reunion in July, I sat at tables where Derek talked about his properties and I said nothing, and my grandmother watched me say nothing with the expression of a woman who had predicted this exactly. She had predicted it because she understood what I was doing, which was honoring her request. She had asked me, at the kitchen table in November 2022 when I first sat with the trust documents, to wait. She said, "Don't say anything until after I'm gone. I want to be present for the family I still have without turning it into this." She gestured at the documents. "This will be what it is when I'm gone. Let me have the rest of it first." I said, "Okay." She said, "It's going to be hard." I said, "I know." She said, "You're going to sit at a lot of tables and listen to Derek describe things that are yours." I said, "I know." She said, "And you're going to do it because you love me." I said, "Yes." She said, "Good girl." The 8 months were exactly as hard as she had predicted, and I sat at every table and I said nothing, and I loved her through every dinner and every phone call and every Sunday visit, and I gave her the rest of it the way she had asked. She died in April 2023. She was 81. She passed at the Savannah house, in the back bedroom where she had slept for 50 years. My mother was with her. I had been there the weekend before. We sat on the back porch in the April warmth, and she asked me about Maya and about the new grant cycle at Atlanta Family Services and about whether I was still running in the mornings, which I was, and we talked the way we always talked, about everything except the documents in Beverly's office. At the end of that Saturday visit, when I was loading my car to drive back to Atlanta, she came to the door and said, "Rosalie." I turned. She said, "Thank you for waiting." I said, "Thank you for trusting me." She went back inside. I drove to Atlanta. She died 11 days later. Beverly Okafor administered the trust with the methodical efficiency of an attorney who had prepared the ground carefully and was now harvesting it cleanly. The independent financial audit was conducted by a certified fraud examiner named Marcus Webb from a firm in Atlanta, recommended by Beverly and retained by the trust in the month following Nora's death. Marcus spent 3 months on the audit. He reviewed 5 years of rental income records, bank transfers, maintenance invoices, and secondary account activity. He produced a report that was, Beverly told me, among the most comprehensive audit documents she had seen in an estate context. The will reading was scheduled for September 2023. The will itself, the companion document to the trust, distributed personal property and a modest savings account equally among the family. The real property would be addressed through the trust administration. Beverly had arranged for the trust administration to happen at the will reading on purpose, with Marcus Webb present and the full audit report tabbed and organized in 2 copies. I did not tell my family what was coming. I had been not telling my family things for 14 months, and I was, by that point, practiced at it. I sat at the conference table at Okafor and Associates in Savannah, in the same chair I had sat in the November morning when I first read the trust documents, and I watched the room fill with my parents and Derek and his wife and 3 cousins and my uncle, and I thought about Nora saying thank you for waiting at the door of her house on a Saturday in April. The will reading was handled in about 30 minutes. Personal effects per Nora's instructions. The savings account divided equally. My uncle received the roll-top desk he had always admired. My mother received a set of pearl earrings. It was careful and specific and entirely Nora. Then Beverly said, "We'll now address the trust." Derek straightened in his chair. He had been waiting for this moment with the confidence of a man who knew what was coming, or believed he knew. He had 5 years of management behind him. He had the tenant relationships, the maintenance contracts, the operational history. He had told my parents, in various conversations over the preceding months, that he expected the trust would formalize what everyone already understood. He had not seen the trust documents. Beverly said, "The Sinclair Family Trust, established March 2019, names the following successor trustee and primary beneficiary." Derek said, "Beverly, I think we all know." Beverly said, "Rosalie Denise Sinclair Porter." The room did not go silent immediately. There was a half-second where the air held what it had been, and then it shifted, and then the silence arrived. Derek said, "I'm sorry." I said, "You're right. You worked very hard on those properties." He looked at me. I said, "My properties." His face went white. I had never seen his face do that before, the specific pallor of a person whose understanding of the ground beneath them has just revised fundamentally. My father stood up, not to do anything, just because his body had reacted before his mind had finished processing. Beverly said, "Mr. Sinclair, we have a second matter to address." She nodded to Marcus Webb, who was seated at the end of the table with 2 binders in front of him. Marcus slid one binder across to Derek and placed the second in the center of the table. Beverly said, "The trust instrument included a provision for an independent financial audit of all management activity on the trust's properties during the trustee's lifetime. That audit was conducted over the past 3 months by Marcus Webb, a certified fraud examiner. Mr. Webb, please summarize your findings." Marcus opened his binder. He said, "Over the 5-year period from the trust's establishment in 2019 through the date of Ms. Sinclair's death in 2023, the 6 trust properties generated a total of $743,600 in gross rental income. Of that amount, $325,200 was properly remitted to the trust account. The remaining $418,400 was redirected to a secondary bank account not authorized by the trust instrument." He looked up from the report. I have the complete transaction record here, organized by property, by month, and by account destination. My mother said, Derek. Just his name.
Just that.
Derek looked at the binder. He looked at Marcus.
He looked at me.
His mouth moved and nothing came out. My father sat back down slowly. He looked at the table the way he looks at things when he is processing something he does not want to be true, with the slow patience of a man who has spent his life trying to be fair and has just discovered that being fair has cost him accuracy. Derek said, finally, the management fees. Marcus said, documented management fees over the 5-year period total $38,200, which is consistent with standard rates for the properties and the market. The $418,400 is above and beyond documented management fees. I have the breakdown. Derek's attorney. He had brought his own attorney, a man named Warren Doyle who had been quiet until now, put his hand briefly on Derek's arm. Derek stopped talking. My aunt said, from across the table, Nora knew. I looked at her. She said, she knew, didn't she? That's why she put the audit provision in. I said, she suspected. She wanted the record to be built correctly if she was right. My aunt looked at the table. Then she said, very quietly, she always saw things.
She did. She always did.
What happened in the weeks after the reading moved in the sequence, these things move. Derek's attorney reviewed the audit documentation and the trust instrument and advised him, eventually, that the evidence was comprehensive and that the trust had a clear legal basis for recovery. There were conversations between attorneys over a period of 3 months. A settlement agreement was reached in December. The terms are confidential. The 6 properties remain in the trust, under my administration. The matter of the $418,400 was resolved through a combination of restitution and structured repayment. Derek and I have not spoken since September. I do not know if we will. I have thought about this more than I expected to, not the properties, not the money, but the brother question. The fact of Derek is the fact of a person who built something real with his own hands and then, when an opportunity to take something more appeared, took it without examining whether the taking was wrong. I understand the mechanism. I am not sure I can forgive it yet. I am not certain forgiveness is even the right frame. What I know is that I am not going to pretend the mechanism was not there, and I am not going to perform a reconciliation because it would make the family dinners easier. My mother called me in October. She said she had been thinking about what Nora had done, about the trust, about the audit provision, about the fact that Nora had been watching and had built the documentation without saying anything to anyone. She said, she told you. I said, she told me in October 2022, at the Sunday dinner. She said, the dinner where Maya asked. I said, yes. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, she was waiting for Maya to ask. I said, I think so. I think she needed someone to say it out loud first. And Maya was the only one who would. My mother said, she loved that child. I said, I know. Maya loved her too. My mother said, Rosalie. My full name, the way she uses it when she means something specific. I'm sorry for what I didn't see. I said, I know, Mom. She said, I'm going to try to do better. I said, I know you are. Maya asked me in November, after the reading, after the settlement, in the way she asks things directly, without preparation. Mom, did it help? What I said at Grandma Nora's. I was driving. She was in the back seat. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. I said, yes, it helped more than you know. She said, I didn't think it was a big deal. I just noticed. I said, that's the most important thing. Just noticing. She thought about this. Then she said, Grandma Nora noticed things too. I said, she did. All her life. Maya said, I want to be like that. I looked at her in the mirror again, 10 years old now, with her grandmother's eyes and her mother's attention for the specific and the true. I said, you already are. The 6 properties are mine. Mine to steward, mine to understand, mine to carry forward the way Nora built them. I have a new property manager, a woman named Celeste Adeyemi, who came recommended by Beverly and who has been managing Atlanta Metro rentals for 12 years and who asked me, in our first meeting, whether I wanted a summary report or a detailed breakdown. I said detailed. She smiled and said that was the right answer. I have been to each property. I have met each tenant. I have introduced myself as the owner and told them the rent would not change and asked how the properties were treating them. 3 of the 6 tenants had been there for more than 7 years. They had known Nora. They told me things about her, specific things, the way she showed up when something needed fixing, the way she remembered their children's names, that filled in parts of her I had known, but not in those specific details. She was meticulous. She was present. She believed in the relationship between a landlord and a tenant as something that mattered. I am trying to continue that. Maya comes with me sometimes on the property visits, when her schedule allows. She sits in the car and reads while I go in, and when I come out she asks what the tenant was like. I tell her. She listens with the full attention she has always had, the attention that asked the right question at a Sunday dinner in October 2022, and started the chain that led to everything. There is a thing Nora said to me once, years before any of this, that I have been thinking about since the September reading. She said, "Rosalie, the truth doesn't go anywhere. It just waits for someone with the patience to find it." Maya found it at 9 years old, without trying. I found the rest. Nora built the structure to make sure the truth had somewhere to land. What hit you hardest in this story? Drop a timestamp in the comments. I read every single one. There is something I want to say about Derek that I have been turning over for months and that I do not want to leave out because it belongs to the complete picture. Derek built his cleaning company from nothing. I mean this accurately. He started with a van and a commercial vacuum and a willingness to take contracts that nobody else wanted, and he built it, through genuine labor and genuine intelligence, into an operation with 22 employees and a client list that included commercial buildings and schools and 3 hospital facilities. This is real. This is his. I have thought about what it means that a person who built something real with his own hands could also, simultaneously, redirect $418,400 from his grandmother's rental income into an account she hadn't authorized. These are not contradictory facts. They are simultaneous truths about the same person, which is the thing that makes real people complicated and real stories honest. What I believe, and I am not certain about this, I hold it carefully, is that Derek had spent so many years hearing that the properties were the family's natural inheritance, and hearing it specifically directed at himself, that at some point the hearing became believing became acting. He had told himself a story about what was his, and the story had become convincing enough that the financial irregularities did not, in his internal accounting, feel like theft. They felt like early access. This is not an excuse. The audit is the audit, and the record is the record, and Nora's trust provision was not ambiguous. What it is the most honest explanation I can find for how a person who built something real could also take something that wasn't his.
I don't know what he tells himself now.
I don't know whether the settlement has produced in him anything like the reckoning it deserves. I am not going to pretend I know, and I am not going to perform a certainty about his inner life that I don't have. What I know is this: Nora saw it. She saw the story he was telling himself, and she understood where it was going, and she built a structure, a trust with an audit provision, a succession plan that skipped the obvious choice, a granddaughter she had been watching carefully for years, that would catch the story and correct it after she was gone. She was 80 years old when she established that trust. She was looking at her family with the full attention she had always brought to everything, and she saw clearly and she built accordingly. I keep coming back to the audit provision. Beverly told me she had pushed back on it. Nora had said, "I know my family." Beverly had deferred to her client. 3 words. I know my family. They contain everything: the love and the grief and the specific wisdom of a woman who had spent 80 years watching people, including the people who were supposed to be her own. I keep those 3 words. Atlanta Family Services has a new grant cycle beginning in January. I am in the middle of the compliance documentation, the kind of work that requires the professional brain, not any other kind, and that I find grounding in the specific way that precise work is grounding when the rest of your life has been large and complicated. Numbers add up, or they don't. Records match, or they don't. The work does not lie to you. Nora would have understood this. She would have said, Yes, exactly that.
The work does not lie.
My daughter Maya, who is 10 now and in the fourth grade and has decided that she wants to be, at various times, a marine biologist and a judge and an archaeologist, came to my office last month on a Take Your Child to Work day and sat at the corner of my desk and watched me work for about an hour. She asked questions that were specific and intelligent and that made my colleagues comment, afterward, on how focused she was. She asked me once, during that hour, why I kept checking the same column of figures 3 times. I said, because the first time you check for mistakes, the second time you check that you found them all, the third time you make sure you didn't introduce any new ones while you were fixing the old ones. She said, that's a lot of checking. I said, that's the job. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to the book she had brought. She has Nora's eyes. She has Nora's quality of attention. She asked the question at the Sunday dinner that started everything, and she has no idea that she did, and I have decided not to tell her until she is older, until she is old enough to understand that noticing a thing and saying a thing is the most important work, and that sometimes a 9-year-old in a kitchen can set in motion something that takes 14 months to complete, and that changes who owns what and who understands what, and who can look at a set of records and say, the truth was always there. It was just waiting. She already knows this. I don't need to tell her. She already is Nora.